Okay, I want to talk about the Phillips curve, which is part of Unit 5. Unit 5's two big graphs, so we want to make sure you know is the Phillips curve graph and the loanable funds graph. The loanable funds graph is already on the internet, so there's two loanable funds graphs in the internet, and I want to talk about the short-run Phillips curve, or the Phillips curve. Phillips is an economist, obviously, and what he did was he plotted unemployment and inflation rates for different years, for decades and decades. And what he saw was that there is a general relationship between unemployment and inflation. In fact, there is just in the short run, long run not so much, but in the short run, there is an inverse relationship between unemployment and inflation. That is, as unemployment goes up, inflation goes down. As inflation goes up, unemployment goes down. Over the long run, though, the Phillips curve, or what we call the long run Phillips curve, is constant, where unemployment is constant and only prices go up. And I'll show you that. And oftentimes we relate that long run Phillips curve, or the Phillips curve itself, to an ADAS graph. So I put two ADAS graphs on the board, and then I've put two Phillips curves on the board. You can see that for both of these, the x-axis is unemployment, while the y-axis is inflation, right? And the Phillips curve kind of slopes around this way. So this SRPC is short-run Phillips curve, and this is long-run Phillips curve, right, for both of these. And obviously an ADAS graph. So I want to show you how these things change, and when this thing changes, what happens over here. And obviously, you can also, if you want, look at Roofonomics on my website. There's a link to Roofonomics, and you can watch this. It's really funny to watch the changes because it's interactive and you can do it. So anyway, let's say that the government decides, let's say right now we're in long run equilibrium. We'll do this up on number 1 over here. This will be Phillips curve number 1. So we're in equilibrium, and let's say that we cut taxes. Okay, so taxes on personal income taxes are cut. And so we know that's going to change AD from AD to AD sub 1. Alright, so it goes up. Here is our new price. We'll call it P sub 1. And our new output is Y sub 1. Right? So we know that output's going up and prices have gone up. We also know that when GDP increases, we normally assume that unemployment is decreasing. Right? So on this curve, let's say we're here at point A. Well, we know that prices just went up, which are increase in prices is inflation, right? And we also know that unemployment went down. So when AD shifts, we go along the short-run Phillips curve. So we go to A to, let's say, point B here, right? Because here was, we'll call it, 2% inflation and 5% unemployment, and now we're at, we'll say, 5% inflation and 2% unemployment, right? So when AD shifts, we go along the Phillips curve. Similarly, let's say the stock market just crashes, and let's say there's a huge loss in wealth, and that's going to affect that's going to affect consumption, which is part of GDP. So let's say AD goes down to, let's say AD shifts down, right? We'll call it AD sub 2. And it's going to shift us down, and now our new price level is price level sub 2. Our new output is Y sub 2. Well, let's say we start off here at point A. As you can see, as we're producing less, unemployment will rise and prices have gone down since AD is shifted. So we might go to, let's say, point C right here, which is, we'll call it, 1% inflation and 8% unemployment, whatever the numbers are. Anyway, you can see that when AD shifts, then there's a shift along the short-run Phillips curve. And it makes sense because if you look at what happens up here, all you need to do is look and analyze what happens in the ADAS graph. And you can see when AD shifts down, prices go down, unemployment goes up. Well, how do we show that? We shift along the curve. If AD goes up, we know the prices have gone up, and so has output, which is, we'll see a reduction of unemployment. So we shift along the curve up the short-run Phillips curve. Okay? It does not change the long-run Phillips curve. Okay? So now let's look at what happens if supply shifts. We'll call this graph 2, and we'll call this graph 2. Okay? So let's say that for whatever reason there is an increased technology in the field, right? And whatever in our economy we've come up with some great new technological advances, and so we know that SRAS will shift out. So short run aggregate supply is going to shift out, which is going to give us a new output and a lower price, right? So we have more output, which is going to reduce unemployment. We also have a lower price. So we can't move along the curve, because if we move along the curve this way, prices would be higher. And if we move along this way, then on the curve, prices would be down, but unemployment would be higher. And we know that's not the case. We know that with the shift in SRAS, we have lower prices and lower unemployment. So what would happen with that is we would actually get a new Phillips curve. We call that short run Phillips curve, we'll say sub 1. Similarly, if there's a huge increase in oil production, of oil costs, and so input costs jack up, that's going to change supply negatively, and will shift supply. We'll call it short run aggregate supply sub 2, and that will give us higher prices, right, and lower output. Well, again, if prices went up, okay, so if prices went up on the curve, that'd be up here, but then that would mean unemployment went down. And we can see that unemployment, since there's less output, right, with P sub 2 and Y sub 1, let's say Y sub 2. With Y sub 2, there's less employment or more unemployment, and with P sub 2, there's higher prices. So what we would do is we would shift the curve out this way, right? So short run Phillips curve sub 2, right? It would go out this way. So anytime the Phillips curve, anytime the aggregate supply curve goes this way, right to the left, then the Phillips curve goes out to the right. There's a shift, right? They mirror each other. All right, so when one goes out this way, the other goes out this way. When one comes in, then this one comes in. Oftentimes we say that increases obviously to the right, so right is good, left is bad. On the Phillips curve, it's opposite. Left is good, right? Lower prices, lower unemployment. Right is bad, higher prices, higher unemployment. This is a sign essentially of stagflation, right? Okay, so let's get back up to this. Now we're here at point B, right? Or we're at point C, either one. Eventually we know that it's going to go back to equilibrium. But let's say we're here, let's say we're at AD sub 1, and let's say we're right here. We know, because we've learned this in Unit 3, prices are higher, right, and wages are sticky, so people eventually start demanding higher wages, which is an input cost. So we know that SRAS will change, right, and go back this way because of input cost. And that will, what? That will be a shift to the left, which means even higher prices. We'll say P sub 3, and the same employment. So what will end up happening is we will have the same original unemployment with just higher prices. So we'd be here at point D, because it always ends up going back. As you can see, this curve shifted this way. So actually what will happen is, since this curve shifted this way, we'll get a new curve this way, right? And it'll be right here, point D, on the new curve. We'll call this short run Phillips curve sub 1, and we have the same original unemployment rate, but a higher price, right? What about long run Phillips curve and long run aggregate supply? They are also mirrors of each other, okay? So let's say that we get a real important reduction in input costs, and let's say LRAS shifts out to the right, right? Let's say we get LRAS this way, right? What's going to happen is, so we can produce whatever at lower prices, and we can produce whatever at less unemployment. So we would have, right, remember right is good here and left is good this way, so we would have a new long run Phillips curve to the left. Same thing, if the long run Phillips curve went out, or sorry, the long run aggregate supply curve went left, and the long run Phillips curve would go out to the right. So essentially, it's like those are my sounds. You can make fun of me on the comments, I don't care. But that's how it works. I know this looks like craziness now, but you should have seen how I did it. If you don't get it, then slow it down. Go over it a couple times until you get it. It makes sense. Go over Roofonomics, read your chapter in your book. Phillips curve should be easy stuff, all right? If you see these questions in the AP exam, this should be money. right? ADAS graph tells you everything you need to know, and the Phillips curve and the ADAS graph go together. So essentially, if you can combine an ADAS graph, a money market graph, a Phillips curve graph, a loanable funds graph, and a production possibilities graph. I give you one scenario on the ADAS curve and then everything else is affected. If you can do that, then you're in a pretty good spot for the AP exam. If you can't, then we need to get there. Okay?